Episode 1. Persons of Interest. The first season finished with our crime-solving trio being arrested for Bunny's murder even though they are innocent. Their podcast competitor Cinda Canning and her crew have started covering the murder investigation on their podcast. Detective Williams and Detective Krebs bring the trio in for questioning. But now that they are experienced with true crime, they don't say anything that can incriminate them. They are soon released as there isn't enough evidence to arrest them and the murder weapon has disappeared. They become even more famous and Oliver starts a new side project with Amy Schumer, who is a new resident of the Arconia. The trio discuss about doing a second season for their podcast, but ultimately decide to call it quits and pursue other endeavors. Charles wants to get back into acting and Mabel wants to get a real job, specifically in art gallery. Everything is fine until a few days later. Cinda releases a podcast episode that insinuates the three are guilty of murder and they know they will have to defend their innocence. Mabel remembers Bunny saying 14 right before she died in her arms. They go to her apartment to look for clues to what happened and find her parrot, Mrs. Gambolini, and then they hide when someone walks in. It is Uma and Howard, and Uma mentions something about a Rose Cooper painting that is extremely valuable, but it isn't there like it's supposed to be. Charles tells the others if they find the painting, they find the killer. Mabel now wants to do a second season of their podcast to clear their names. When they get up to Charles's apartment, they find the painting hanging there, and someone is setting them up. Charles also says, "That is my father," when inspecting the painting. Episode 2. Framed. Charles tells the others that his father is one of the people in the painting, and Mabel reveals to them that Bunny said the word savage right before she died as well. So she said both 14 and savage and believes she was saying something about Charles's father. Howard organizes a building memorial for Bunny, and the trio use this as the perfect time to return the painting back to Bunny's apartment before anyone can see they are in possession of it. At the memorial, we meet Leonora Folger, Bunny's mother and the painting's true owner. Meanwhile, Oliver and Mabel work to sneak the painting up the elevator, but they have to go outside first and Charles accidentally let the door close and they are locked out. In a panic, they stash the painting near a dumpster, but when they go to check it out later, of course it is gone. Mabel goes to the art studio, and there is a little love blossoming between her and Alice, the manager of the gallery. Later on, Oliver goes up to meet with Amy Schumer about their partnership, and he is shocked to see the painting hanging up in her apartment. She explains that she found it out near the dumpster and felt it was too good of art to be thrown out. Charles meets with Leonora to talk about the painting, but it causes him to remember a day of his childhood when his father was arrested, and he feels everything is connected. Charles tells her about Amy having the painting, but when they go check it out, Leonora says it is fake, not the original. Bunny's parrot is given to Oliver as part of Bunny's will, and the parrot says it knows who did it. Episode 3. The Last Day of Bunny Folger. The trio tries to understand what Bunny's final day was like before she was killed. In a flashback, it is shown that it was Bunny's last day as board president for the Arconia, and she was considering moving to Florida now that she was retired. She received a call from a mysterious person who wanted to buy her expensive painting, but Bunny declined the idea of selling it. At the end of the day, she realized how much the Arconia actually meant to her, and she decided she didn't want to retire and she wanted to keep being the board president. She was going to hand the reins over to a woman named Nina Lynn, but when Nina Lynn found out Bunny wanted to stay on, she was upset and threatened her for not stepping down. Bunny didn't back down and said her decision was final, and Howard recorded the whole interaction. A little later, Bunny heard Charles, Oliver, and Mabel celebrating their first season podcast completion, and she went up to celebrate with them as she felt lonely. The trio didn't see that she was upset, and they declined her request to join them as they felt she always showed animosity towards them. When she returned to her apartment, she was met by a masked and gloved figure. The trio feels extremely guilty after this because if they would have just let her hang out with them like she wanted to, maybe she wouldn't be dead right now. But now they have their first prime suspect. Nina had a motive to kill Bunny, so she could be the board president. Episode 4. Here's Looking at You. Remember hearing about Lucy from Season 1? The daughter of Charles's ex-girlfriend? Well, she finally makes her first on-screen appearance and shows up at his apartment. She reveals to Charles, Oliver, and Mabel that she discovered secret tunnels inside the walls of the Arconia many years ago when she was living there. She wonders if the killer used the tunnels to kill Bunny so they wouldn't be seen on cameras. As they walk through the tunnels, they overhear Nina and her husband agreeing that Bunny had to go so that the building could be modernized and stop looking so ancient between the walls. Oliver also witnesses an argument between Teddy and Theo, who have since been released on parole after their crimes from season 1. Seeing these two together makes Oliver want to have a better relationship with his son. A little bit later, Charles, Mabel, Oliver, and Lucy all visit Nina in hopes of getting her to confess to Bunny's murder. But then she goes into labor and begs them to find Bunny's true killer, insinuating she is innocent. That night, Lucy tells Charles she ran away from her mother's house because her mother is getting remarried, and she doesn't like the idea of someone replacing Charles as she viewed him as her true father. Charles agrees that they are close, but he urges her to go home and make things right with her mother. Before she leaves, she warns Charles that he is danger, but doesn't mention that she was in the Arconia the night of Bunny's death, and she believes saw the killer escaping through the tunnels. Charles goes to Jan in prison to ask for help. Episode 5. The Tell. Jan tells Charles that the true murderer is possibly an artist since they composed the crime scene to frame Mabel, and they did a pretty good job of it. Also explains why the real painting was stolen. Later, Charles and Oliver learn that Mabel is dating Alice, and they find it suspicious since she came into her life right when Bunny was murdered, but they don't tell Mabel this. That weekend, Alice hosts a party at her studio for an eclectic art crowd, and Oliver proposes that they play a murder mystery game called Son of Sam. Really, this is just him trying to get any information he can out of Alice. By the end of the game, he declares Alice the murderer and asks her a series of personal questions, forcing her to reveal that she lied about her background and her studies so people would think she is a legitimate artist, and everyone is shocked by this revelation. The following day, the trio learned that Bunny met someone in her regular diner the day before she died, and it was a one-time meeting, so they wonder if she met with the killer and knew them. Alice apologizes to Mabel for all the lies and pretending to be someone else, and the two reconcile by sharing personal secrets with one another. Meanwhile, Oliver's son, Will, takes a DNA test for his son's school project, which reveals that he has Greek ancestry unlike Oliver's Irish heritage, possibly signaling that Oliver isn't Will's true father. Oliver unfortunately speculates that his ex-wife had an affair with Teddy, who is Will's real biological father. Oliver tells Will this doesn't change anything, and he will always be his son. Episode 6. Performance Review. The trio wants Detective Williams' help with a fingerprinted matchbook they recently found, but she has gone on maternity leave. They receive a text message in her name to leave their evidence at a public place, and they speculate this is the killer trying to get hands on any evidence they have. The trio decides to leave a glitter bomb in hopes of catching the killer, but of course, they have personal problems that distract them while they are waiting, and they miss the opportunity to see who it was. Elsewhere, Cinda Canning locates a man that claims to be from Mabel's past, and the man says that Mabel cut off one of his fingers in a fit of rage in the past, and Cinda wants to use it in her podcast to make Mabel look bad. Cinda's assistant, Poppy, thinks it is immoral to do this because it is obvious the man is lying and it would defame Mabel. When Cinda won't listen to her or promote her, Poppy decides to go to Mabel, and she reveals some hidden truths about Cinda, so Mabel will have her own ammunition. Afterwards, Mabel goes to the art studio where she sees Alice recreating the scene of Bunny's murder for an exhibit. Heartbroken, Mabel runs off and sees a glitter-bombed person on the subway, and she immediately thinks this person might be the killer. A little later, Charles and Oliver receive a video that shows Mabel stabbing this glittered person, but the video makes it look like she is crazy and ran after the stabbing. Some onlookers even call it Bloody Mabel Part 2. Episode 7. Flipping the Pieces. The episode begins with a flashback detailing Mabel's relationship with her father and how he sadly died from cancer. In present day, Mabel wakes up in Theo's apartment with no memory of the subway attack, and her bag is also missing. Theo explains that he was also on the subway and witnessed everything that happened and brought Mabel to his apartment after she passed out. Theo shows her an employee badge of Coney Island that her assailant dropped during the attack, so they go there together to see if they can find this person. Mabel is able to find her bag before the assailant can see her, but the matchbook with the fingerprints she had are gone. So the killer thought the matchbook was a smoking gun and had to get rid of it. Meanwhile, Detective Williams visits Charles and Oliver, who reveal they have the murder knife, which they give her for tests and analysis. After fleeing Coney Island, Mabel forgives Theo for killing Zoe that night many years ago, and then Theo tells her how he saw someone escaping from Bunny's apartment the night she died, but didn't get a good look at their face. Mabel goes to meet up with Charles and Oliver, and she shows them a picture of Lucy that the killer put in her bag to find. Mabel thinks Lucy may be the killer's next target, but Charles will not let that happen. Charles tries to call her and get a hold of her, but the call is cut off when a blackout hits the city. Episode 8. Hello, Darkness. Charles realizes that Lucy is all alone in his apartment, so he races back to the Arconia in hopes of saving her before the killer can get to her. At the Arconia, the blackout forces the Arconia's residents to make new connections with each other and actually start conversing with each other. Howard hangs out with one of his neighbors, whom he has a crush on, and Howard eventually asks the man out. Concurrently, Lester, the Arconia's doorman, helps Nina assemble a baby swing, during which Nina evaluates Lester's job and gives him a rightful promotion. When the trio get back to the Arconia, they discover that someone broke into Charles's apartment and must have chased Lucy through the tunnels. They go through the tunnels themselves, and they encounter Marv and think he may be the culprit to everything going on. It turns out Marv just wanted to help catch the killer, but he unintentionally scared them away with his presence. At Marv's request, Oliver agrees to record him for a podcast episode, while Lucy eventually makes her way back to Charles, and he is relieved she is alive. Lucy finally tells Charles what she saw on the night of Bunny's murder. The building power resumes a little bit later, and the trio runs into Detective Krebs in the building, and they are shocked when they notice glitter all over his neck. He is the assailant. Episode 9. Sparring Partners. Mabel tries to confront Krebs about his involvement in Bunny's murder, but Krebs denies any accusations she makes. He does mention his admiration for Cinda Canning's podcast, and this makes Mabel believe he is the killer even more. Meanwhile, Charles and Oliver discover the original Rose Cooper painting hidden under the cage of Mrs. Gambolini, Bunny's parrot. Charles further concludes that Leonora is Rose Cooper herself. She reveals to Charles that she and his father were lovers for years, and he was arrested as a result for trying to defend her from her enraged, abusive husband. She also shows Charles another painting that is hidden in the canvas which depicts a young Charles and his father, which makes Charles tear up. Elsewhere, Oliver confirms via a DNA test that Teddy is indeed Will's biological father, but as said earlier, it doesn't change anything and Will always be Oliver's son. Will doesn't want to tell Teddy either and doesn't want anything to change between them. Alice gives Mabel a jigsaw puzzle as a peace offering for their fight a few episodes earlier, and Mabel realizes that one of Cinda A podcasts mentioned a restaurant with the logo she saw on Krebs' backpack. Mabel goes to question Poppy about what she knows, and Poppy reveals that her real name is Becky Butler, the subject of an old podcast Cinda did that made her famous. Cinda rescued Poppy and took her in under her wing, and she's been with her ever since. Poppy also reveals that Krebs and Cinda are lovers, and he was the one who helped provide her confidential information in past cases that she used to solve crimes on her podcast. Mabel concludes that Cinda is the true mastermind behind Bunny's murder, and it makes sense why she wanted to pin everything on the Only Murders in the Building podcast. It would be a hit for her to cover. Episode 10. I Know Who Did It. Season Finale. The podcast trio stages a killer reveal where they invite every suspect that they have and put them all in a room together to record the final episode of the podcast. Everyone arrives, and Mabel at first says Cinda is the true killer, but Cinda refutes and tells Mabel she is wrong. Mabel agrees, and then she accuses Alice of being the killer, and it seems to be the truth when Alice stabs Charles in the stomach. Cinda praises Mabel for finally solving the case, which makes Poppy irritated, and she reveals a bunch of information only the real killer would know, and she doesn't like others taking credit for what she has done. Then out of nowhere, Charles wakes up completely unharmed, and the guests all reveal the party was an act to expose Poppy as the real killer and get her to confess to her crimes. They knew she wouldn't want anyone else getting credit. Detective Williams found the murder knife had Poppy's, or better known as Becky's, DNA on it, and when Bunny said 14 to Mabel right before she died, she was referring to the combo meal number 14 at the diner she visits, which Poppy always ordered when they met up. With the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, Poppy is arrested along with Krebs, who is revealed to be Poppy's lover as well and supplied her with confidential police information. He was hooking up with both Poppy and Cinda had no idea. Mabel says that Poppy murdered Bunny because she wanted to start her own podcast, and she knew pinning the murder on the podcast trio would be an overnight sensation, but she was caught before she could start it. To close the season off, Charles starts acting again. Mabel and Alive give dating another try, and Oliver reconciles with his son after the bombshell earlier in the season. 1 year later, on opening night of a Broadway play Oliver is directing, the lead actor, Ben Glenroy, suddenly collapses on stage during his performance, setting up the murder for Season 3. And that is it for Season 2. We'll get Season 3 uploaded next, so hope you can check that one out when it's uploaded. Thanks for watching.